Ja, hallo. Wie schon angekündigt, jetzt folgen die Redebeiträge von Mumia Abu-Jamal und Johanna Fernandez, seiner langjährigen Freundin und Genossin. Johanna Fernandez wird im März diesen Jahres eine Infotour durch die BRD machen. Wer dazu noch Nachfragen hat oder auch zu Mumias Gesundheitszustand, kann sich gerne am Mumia-Stand einfinden.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to the Rosa-Luxemburg-Conference. It's an honor to be here with you from afar. Thankfully, we've got technology. You've probably heard by now that there is an opening like no other in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who on December 9th, 1981, was accused of killing a white police officer in Philadelphia. He spent 28 and a half years on death row, and he's now serving a life in prison without parole. For more than 37 years, this world-famous imprisoned radio journalist and former Black Panther has waged an unrelenting battle in the courts for his freedom. And despite evidence of epic violations, of tampering with evidence on the part of the police to obtain Mumia's conviction, and racism on the part of the presiding judge, the courts have consistently denied Mumia relief. They've done so by reversing their own legal precedents, a development known as the Mumia exception. Just to give you a sense of the scandalous evidence that exists out there that the courts have never been willing to hear, I'll cite and bring forth the example of Dr. Michael Schiffman's discovery. Michael Schiffman, who's a professor at the University of Heidelberg, he discovered what are known as the Polikoff photographs that were taken at the crime scene by the first person at the crime scene, who was a photojournalist in Philadelphia at the time. Those photographs have been presented to the courts, and they're important in part because they show Officer James Forbes, who testified in court that he had properly handled the guns allegedly retrieved at the crime scene. He's seen in these photographs handling the guns with his bare hands, which, as we all know, doesn't happen in a regular crime scene unless there is some framing of someone involved. Mumia's incarceration and attempts to silence him are important to this conversation because they offer a framework for understanding why there has not been an opening in the last 37 years. His incarceration and attempts to silence him are a continuation of the government-led campaign of repression against Black radicals in the 1960s. And essentially that campaign, that was a homicidal one deployed against the Black Panthers, for example, by the FBI, sought to stamp out and marginalize the influence of the Black Panthers on a radicalized Black working class. Mumia's case and the crime for which he was framed forms part of the state's counter-revolution against the movements of the 1960s. And as many folks here at the Rosa-Luxemburg-Conference know, in every generation, the government makes an example or attempts to make an example of radicals. It executes them or tries to execute them as warning sign to society of what could happen to those who challenge the state. But today, there is a legal opening like no other in this world-famous case, a man who's been persecuted, demonized by the American state to no end. Not only is there an opening, but we're winning, and the possibility of bringing Mumia home is greater than ever. So how did we get here? The opening was made possible as a result of seemingly distant developments. You probably know that in 2011, a new generation of activists put their tents in Wall Street in New York, and the Occupy movement surged in cities throughout the country and across the world. The movement made critiques of capitalism acceptable for the first time in US history. And it really began a new wave of activism since the 1990s and 9/11, which pretty much put a hold to public critiques of society in the United States. And then between 2012 and 2014, a series of horrific killings of black youth by a white supremacist security guard and by the police were captured on camera. The world witnessed the killings of Eric Garner in New York, Mike Brown in Ferguson, and Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and countless others. And before long, there were riots exploding in Ferguson and Baltimore. And in cities across America, from Los Angeles to New York, large protests were seen recurrently for weeks and months, and these were the largest protests we'd seen since the 1960s. These rebellions and the organizations that emerged thereafter, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, forced a conversation in the public square in the United States about class inequality and racism in America. They began, these rebellions, the process of educating Americans about the horrors of police brutality and mass incarceration. They shifted consciousness, forced government to take action, and shifted the balance of power around these issues. This is why sociologists, historians, socialists, activists, analysts, and critics of society say that movements change history, because they put limits on the abuses of power by government against the people, and they literally change the way we live. In 2016, getting back to the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, when Bill Clinton spoke in Philadelphia as he was campaigning for his wife, who was running for office, Hillary Clinton, the Black Lives Matter group in Philadelphia lambasted him and his wife for their support of the 1994 crime bill, which massively expanded the apparatus of mass incarceration. At around the same time, in summer 2016, the Supreme Court of the United States decided a very important case involving a Philadelphia defendant and a Pennsylvania judge. The case is known as Williams versus Pennsylvania, and in it, the High Court established the parameters of judicial bias. It argued that you can't be a prosecutor and judge in the same case. More specifically, it held that Judge Ronald Castile should have recused himself from the case of Terrence Williams because he had previously helped prosecute Williams when Ronald Castile, the judge, previously served as Philadelphia DA. Well, guess what? Ronald Castile was also judge and prosecutor in Mumia's case and in the cases of countless other prisoners in Philadelphia. That same year, Mumia's attorneys entered a Williams claim in the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, as did many other defendants in Philadelphia who had been prosecuted by Ron Castile when he was DA, but then denied their appeals when they were standing before Ronald Castile, now the judge of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So another judge gets assigned the case that is known as the Williams claim in Mumia's case. And that judge is Judge Leon Tucker. At the request of our attorneys, Leon Tucker ordered all files released in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal because our attorneys needed to prove that there had been bias, that in fact Ronald Castile as DA had been involved in a significant decision in Mumia's case, and that because of that, the judge should have recused himself. Ronald Castile should have recused himself when he was the judge of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So a drama-filled hearing ensued over the course of 2 years. The Mumia movement packed the courts, but so did the Fraternal Order of Police. And even the original prosecutor in the case back in 1981, Joe McGill, showed up. So the original DA in the case, Joe McGill, showed up to the courtroom to see what was going on. At that point, we knew that we were winning and that there was a huge shift in this case. Of course, the widow of the fallen officer, Maureen Faulkner, also showed up at the hearings. In December 2018, finally, Judge Leon Tucker, after 2 long years of hearings, ruled that Mumia's right to an impartial judge was violated. And he ordered the reopening of all 4 of the appeals that were denied Mumia while his case was heard in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court between 1998 and 2012, when Judge Ronald Castile heard and denied his appeals in that court. Because this decision has been appealed by the prosecutor's office, right? The decision that we've won is now being appealed by the prosecutor's office. It is now being reviewed by the Superior Court, a higher court in the state of Pennsylvania that's going to determine whether the claims made by our attorneys, but the decision made by Leon Tucker is going to hold water. I think we need to backtrack at this point, and this is really the coup de grace in this moment. In 2017, a year into the hearings that were presided over by Leon Tucker on the Williams issue, the Black working class of Philadelphia, which had been emboldened by the struggle against police brutality across the country, elected a left liberal district attorney, Larry Krasner. While the progressive DA of Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, has continued to prosecute the case, at around the same time of Judge Leon Tucker's decision siding with Mumia, the DA, the new DA of Philadelphia, revealed the stunning discovery of 6 boxes in a back room in the bowels of the Philadelphia DA's office. This is the biggest development in this case. And boxes were found not just in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, but in the cases of many other defendants. What's important about this is that in those boxes, we have evidence, in particular, a note written by the lead witness used by the prosecutor to railroad Mumia and send him to death row. That lead witness, whose name is Robert Chobert, sends a note to the DA, Joe McGill, which essentially asks, "Where's my money?" suggesting that Robert Chobert might have been paid off by the DA's office for testifying against Mumia. Because of the potentially exculpatory nature of the new evidence, our attorneys have asked the Superior Court to send the case back to the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas for review. I'll just say this for clarification. In Pennsylvania, a defendant is not allowed to have 2 different issues in the court. They have to choose one issue, and once that issue has been resolved in the court, then they move on to the other. Because of the significance of the potentially exculpatory evidence in these 6 boxes, our attorneys have asked the Superior Court to put the Williams claim on hold and to send the new evidence to the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas for review. I'll just end by saying that this is a complicated case. There are many details involved. Mike Schiffman is probably one of the most knowledgeable folks, experts in this case, and he is in the audience probably and can take questions. I just want to congratulate on the conference on such a powerful title. Its essence, I believe, holds the key to victory in Mumia's case and building a new society. If we do not continue to struggle for Mumia's freedom in the streets, he will not get justice in the courts. So we need to continue the campaign both in the United States and nationally. I would be very happy to continue this conversation in the next months, given that I'm actually going to Germany and will be there between March 13th and 22nd for the Day of the Political Prisoner events. I want to wish you a phenomenal conference. And I want to say that the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal is not about Mumia, as you all know. Ultimately, the case of political imprisonment and incarceration raises larger questions of the kind of society we want to live in. Do we want to live in a society that imprisons people, or do we want to live in a society in which prisons are no longer necessary? Thank you very much. Have a wonderful conference.
It's time to free Mumia, we gotta bring him home. Freedom for Oscar Lopez, let everybody know. The people gotta show me, we screaming out for show. But what we need is freedom, we screaming free him out, free him out.
Free him all now, free him all now.